Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, today in the life of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, we'll talk about how in the time of Umar Al-Quds was opened or conquered. And in the current environment that we are living in, it is important for us to have an understanding about how it came under the rule of Islam. And what were the circumstances and how the people were living prior to Islam came to this part of the world. So previous week we talked about Al-Qadisiyah. We completed the Battle of Qadisiyah, and in that battle we saw that how the Muslims came out the victorious, and that was one of the biggest stepping stone towards the conquering of the Persian Empire. And it's important for us to comprehend this idea of when we are talking about Persian Empire or Roman or Byzantine empires, these were the superpowers of that time. And in compared to that, if you compare the Muslims, you will always find the Muslims were always in general outnumbered. By the numbers wise, by the weaponry, whatsoever you want to think of it. The thing that was the main reason for their success was Allah Azza wa Jal was on their side. And the message that they were carrying was to raise the Kalimatul Haq. And the Muslims were not going to these lands unlike today's contemporary, whether they are colonialist nations, imperialist nations, the one who are occupying the lands for the sole purpose of stealing the resources or to just gain power. If you compare that to when Islam came and is spread across the world, first of all, Islam was not forced on the people to become Muslim, because in Islam it's not allowed for us to convert somebody by force to Islam. And there are many historical evidences for that this did not happen. And not only historical, but current times also is the evidence of that as well. The nations where Muslims ruled, whether it was Indian subcontinent, whether it was the Bilad al-Sham we call it, or Levant area, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Africa, we find that in all those places, Islam reached, and people continue to practice their religion for centuries when Islam was ruling over them. To the point, if you look at the Indian subcontinent, until today, even though Muslims ruled there for 800 years, Muslims are not in majority. Even if you combine all the Muslims in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, they are not in majority. That itself should be sufficient for us to understand this. Same way we find in Bilad al-Sham, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, that the people continue to practice their religion. Until now, even those churches would not only continue to exist and people continue to worship in those areas, but Muslims were protecting those churches. And this is what we will see inshallah when we talk about how the area of Al-Quds, which was referred as Elia or Ramallah, which was the capital at that time of that piece of land, how the Muslims opened that land and allowed other religions to continue to practice their religions. And as a matter of fact, this is an historical fact that in the land of Palestine, the only time where Muslims, Jews, and Christians continue to coexist in peaceful manner when the Islam was ruling over them. When Crusaders were there, they were slaughtering the Jews. And the current situation is very evident for all. And when the Crusaders came back, there was a huge massacre happened of the Muslims. And the Masjid al-Aqsa was turned into a stable, a stable. And when we look at the situation, inshallah, today when we talk about the conquest of Jerusalem, before the Jerusalem was conquered, Islam already was spreading in many of the areas that were controlled by the Byzantine, that include Yarmouk was already happened, and then we know Homs, Damascus, Damascus, and many other smaller cities of the Syria, today's Syria, were already opened by the Muslims. And now there was a big front was open, which was Ajnadain. And Amr bin al-As radiallahu an, who was the leader of the army, he was the one who was leading the Muslims. And there were some tactics were done by Amr bin al-As, by the instructions of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu an, how to distract the Byzantine armies from Ajnadain. And hence, at the end of the day, Muslims were able to open Ajnadain, which was a big victory for the Muslims at that time. Now the Byzantine army was led by their leader, who was in line next to the emperor. And he is referred as Artabun. Artabun was the one who was as commander, senior commander of the Byzantine army. Now, he was one of the craftiest commander of the army. And when Amr bin al-As found out about him, that he has gathered a huge army to counter the Muslims, he wrote to Umar. And Umar's response to him was that we have sent against the Artabun of the Byzantine, the Artabun of the Arab, which is Amr bin al-As radiallahu anh. Amr bin al-As radiallahu anh, he was a great army general in Islam and prior to Islam. Amr, as we can tell by the name, Amr bin al-As, As bin Wa'il was one of the leaders of the Quraysh, the one who harmed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in many ways. And his son, Amr bin al-As radiallahu anh, he accepted Islam, and not only accepted it, but now he became one of the means for the spread of Islam to the huge part of the world. Now, after that, and this whole incident happened in the 15th and the 16th year after the Hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, the Muslim army, it surrounded the Ilya. Again, when I'm saying the Ilya is the old name of Jerusalem or Al-Quds. So, hence, when we read the books from the Hadith or the history books, and even the treaty that was written between Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh and the Christians at that time in Al-Quds, refer to that area as Ilya, Ahl Ilya. So now, here, Amr bin al-As radiallahu anh, he surrounded the Byzantines. So the patriarch, his name was Sophronius. Sophronius, he decided to have a final attempt, failed. Amr bin al-As was very consistent, and he was saying, first he reached out to Amr bin al-As radiallahu anh, and he wanted to meet Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh in person. He said, when the conversation was going on, Amr bin al-As was very persistent on conquering Ilya, and he said, you cannot open it, this can only be opened by Umar, the person named by Umar radiallahu anh. Similarly, Byzantine commander, Artabun, he wrote to Amr bin al-As saying, you are my friend and my counterpart. Your position among your people is same as my position. He understood that this is the Artabun of the Arab. And he said, by Allah, you will not be able to conquer any part of Palestine after Ajnadain. So go back and do not be deceived lest you defeated like those who came before you. Amr wrote back, I am the one who's going to conquer this land. And now look at his response. Artabun said, he sent the letter back with the messenger, and he said that the one who can open this land, Bayt al-Maqdis, is a man who's called Umar. Which means that the siege that was going on, so let's not forget that the Muslim armies were fighting for a long time. The siege was going on for months. So now, at that time, they wanted to do a treaty with the Muslims now. And they sent out Amr bin al-As radiallahu an. He wrote back to Umar bin Khattab radiallahu an, it seems like the only way is you come here. And there are many reports, by the way, about this whole subject of Umar radiallahu an, how he arrived in Al-Quds. As he came on a donkey, in a very simple clothes. Some reports talk about the number of patches also on the clothes as well. And he's with his servant, one donkey, both of them are traveling. And as a matter of fact, Umar was offered that you are going to meet the Byzantines. You have to dress up like them. And Umar refused, of course. And when they were taking turns, when they got to the entry point, the border, it was a turn for the servant to be on the donkey and Umar to be walking. And even though the servant wanted Umar to be on the mount, and Umar refused. And subhanallah, that these Nasara, these Christians who were there, they had information about even this in their previous books. That how is going to happen, the one who will be entering, how he will be entering also. And when they saw Umar radiallahu anh, the way he was entering, it fulfilled all their prophecies that they were aware of. And they actually called up others also to come and see that he is the one who's supposed to be taking over. And then, when they, but there's just to be clear about, you will read in the historical books, there are some reports talk about that Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiallahu an is the one who did the siege, and he's the one who read the letter to Umar bin Khattab radiallahu an, and Umar came based on Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah's report. But that is not as accurate as the report of Amr bin al-As. It does not really much make a difference. I just want to bring it up so you will know that if you read something like that, that there are some reports talk this way. That is true that Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah's army was called up. Along with, he divided his 35,000 soldiers into 7 parts, and they were led by 7 different leaders, including Khalid bin Walid, Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, Sharhabil bin Hasana, Mirqal Hisham ibn Abi Waqas, Musayyab ibn Najiyah, Qais bin Hubayra, and Urwa ibn Muhallal. So these are the 7, each one had 5,000, and 5,000 were coming in for one at a time. So about 35,000 soldiers were coming with Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah. But he's not the one who did the siege, because he was already busy opening up Homs at that time and different areas of Bilad al-Sham. So it is more accurate to say Amr bin al-As radiallahu an is the one who did the siege and wrote the letter to Umar bin Khattab radiallahu an, and upon which Umar came. Now, when Umar came radiallahu an, and the patriarch of the Byzantine, of the Christians, he came out to meet Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh. And they agreed upon a sulh. That treaty later on became, you can think of it as one of the templates of the treaties later on between the Muslims and the Christians. When the lands were opening, similar kind of treaties were written later on as well. And it's a very famous treaty. In that treaty, and I will try to summarize some of it, it starts in the name of Allah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and the letter goes on, هذا ما عاتب عبد الله عمر أمير المؤمنين أهل إيليا, that this is the letter that the name of Allah, the most gracious, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, that this is what the servant of Allah, Abdullah Umar, the leader of the believers, Amir al-Mu'mineen, has granted to the people of Ahl Ilya of security, min al-aman. أعطاهم أمانا لأنفسهم وأموالهم. He gave the security to their wealth and their nufus, their souls. And also he has granted them وَلِكَنَائِسِهِمْ وَسَلْبَانِهِمْ. That is talking about their churches and their crosses. They will be protected by the Muslims. See, subhanallah, that this is how when the Muslims entered in the past, and even whenever they will enter, this is one of the basic things that the Muslims do. Our purpose is not to go and destroy the houses of Allah which are out there. As a matter of fact, they were protecting them here. So He has granted them security for themselves, their possessions, their churches, their crosses, their sick and healthy, and all their co-religious. Their churches shall not be taken for residence, shall not be demolished, nothing shall be damaged from them or from their surroundings, nor shall their crosses be removed or anything taken from their property. They shall not harass because of the religion, and none of them shall be harmed. But there is another aspect of that treaty which we find some differences, but it is, as a matter of fact, that the Nasrani, the one who wanted to have this treaty with the Muslims. And let's not forget that this treaty is done by the Ahl Ilya. When we say Ahl Ilya, because they were occupied by the Byzantines. They were Byzantines, they were robbers who were robbing the land. And now they were original people of Palestine, who were the Christians. And they were the one who were dealing with Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu here. So they are the one who wanted that the Jews will not be allowed to live with them in Ilya. Later on, Umar is the one who brought them actually to do worship in their Wailing Walls and all those things. But they did not want. Now the people of Ilya say they will have to pay the jizya for this. And we talked about at large about the issue of the jizya. I don't have to repeat that. If there's any question about that, we can talk about that as well in the later Q&A, inshallah. As inhabitants of the cities, they will pay, and they have to expel from the Ilya the Byzantines and the thieves. See, that was part of their deal. Even the one from Palestine, who are the Nasara, they wanted them to be kicked out now. So the Muslims were there, and they were facilitating this. And they said they have to expel the Ilya, the Byzantines, and the Byzantines and the thieves. Those of them who leave shall have security for themselves and their belongings until reach a place of safety. Even for them, Muslims, because this is a sulh, this is a peace treaty was going on. They were allowed to leave in peace. They can go to a secure place, and until then they are in security of the Muslims. Or if they want to, it says, and whoever wants to stay in Ilya shall be safe provided they pay jizya like the people of Ilya. And if any of the people of Ilya want to leave with Byzantines and their belongings with them, they and their churches and crosses shall be safe until they reach a place of safety. By the way, if you go back to the recent history also, you will find many of the Christians of the Palestine have reminded many of the scholars of the Muslims regarding this treaty, what happened to the treaty of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, that we made with you. Why you are not fulfilling that treaty? And subhanallah, the Muslims have to be reminded of our heroes like Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, who made the treaty with them, and we are not living by the treaty at this point. Then it goes on and it says, the promise of Allah may be He exalted, His Messenger ﷺ, the Khalifa and the believers is therefore given to abide by the terms of this treaty as long as the people pay the jizya. And it was witnessed by these Kabair Sahaba, Khalid bin Walid, Amr bin al-As, Abdurrahman bin Auf, and Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan radiyallahu anhum ajma'een. And of course Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu himself. And it says 15th year after the Hijr. This is the treaty that was done. Now, these Christians who were there, when they met Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, they were showing him the city and they wanted him to pray in one of their churches. There's a famous church of theirs where they wanted Umar to come and pray in there. And Umar refused. And subhanallah, you can see the firasa of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, intuition of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh. He said, if I pray here, people will make a masjid here, or they will have a reason to replace this church by the masjid. Hence he said he will pray outside. And there is a masjid in Umar built there on at the spot where Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh prayed. See, Umar was even keen on protecting those religious places of others to that extent. Even though he was offered to pray by them, he refused. And we see that Muslims continue to protect the lives and the honor and the wealth of the people who remained under the protection of Muslims, and they continue to worship their religion. Unfortunately, in Gaza, many of those churches which were standing there for thousands of years, they have been even destroyed now. Along with, of course, tens or hundreds of thousands of lives, innocent lives have been taken. Masajid, hospitals, schools, universities have been destroyed. So, when we look at this historical event, let's remember that this was taken even though there was a siege, but there's a peace treaty, Sulh happened, and after the peace treaty, the Muslims were able to open the land, and that stayed under the rule of Islam for another 400 or 500 years or so, when the Crusaders came again, and then there was a massacre of the Muslims happened, and then it stayed under the occupation of the Crusaders for about 90 years, and Salahuddin Ayyubi, rahimahullah, he came and he was able to recapture the land of Palestine. And now, today, it has been occupied for more than 100 years, since British took over and then handed over to the Israeli state in 1948, fulfilling the Balfour Agreement. So now, when we see what's happening, we have to remember the history of this. And the people who were living there, these were the indigenous people of that land, whether they were Christians, whether they were Muslims, because many of them converted to Islam as well. And we understand that Islam does not force anybody to become a Muslim. It's not even allowed. La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in deen. But Islam goes to make sure that the people are under the just rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the only purpose when we take Islam to the places. And then offer to the people, they take it, this is good for them. If they don't, this is between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inshallah, we'll stop here, and if there is any question or comment about today's subject, inshallah, I'll try to answer them. Yes.